Yesterday, we discussed the shitos of the Rashbam and Tosfos plus Rabbeinu Peretz on the issue of Sheson Chai and Sheson B'Vasachas, which is the sugya here on Daf Kuf Ches Amud Beis. And now we move on to study a Talmud of the Ramban. His name was Rabbeinu David, and you'll see this in the Amudei Hod quoted on page Yud Gimel. And this is the language of Rabbeinu David. Mikol makom zachinu leida min Yerushalmi pirush shesa'an b'vasachas shehu kipirush Rabbeinu Shmuel Zal. And based on the Yerushalmi, we see a support for the Rashbam's interpretation. Shalosh shesa'an al seder mishnasenu. That the b'vasachas situation is where he did not drink the 4 kosos ala seder, meaning each bracha gets its own kos, but rather he drank them consecutively. Elamasha omru yidayin yotza, and that was the original statement of Shmuel, but it was reiterated by Rava and by Rav. So Rav is talking about the case of Sheson V'Vasachas, and he says, Yedeyayin Yotza, Eino Kimoshe Pirush Rabbeinu Shmuel Zal. Here's where Rabbeinu David deviates from the Rashbam, and he says the following. Sheyotzi Yedei Simchas Yontif. Right, the way we saw in the Rashbam, Yidei Yayin Yotza means Simchas Yontiv, and we had major problems with that Rashbam because nowhere does Shmuel or Rava or Rav indicate that this sugya is addressing the mitzvah of Simchas Yontiv. Aval Pirusho, but rather says Rabbeinu David, rejecting the Rashbam, Sheyotzi Yidei Mitzvahs Shtias Yayin Shel Arba Kosos, that the basic fundamental mitzvah of drinking 4 cups of wine he fulfilled. El Lo Yotza Yidei HaSeder Shesidru Bahem Chachamim. He did not fulfill that extra kiyum which was piggybacked on top of the Shtias Yayin of 4 kosos, namely to recite each bracha with a kos, and each kos is a fulfillment of the bracha on that kos. So that mitzvah, which the Rabbanan added to the basic mitzvah of Shtias Yayin, of 4 kosos, that he forfeits. So in other words, Rabbeinu David is willing to sort of be flexible about the word Yayin here. And Yayin is not meant to conjure up the image of Simchas Yontif as the Rashbam insists, but rather the Yayin here means the Seder of Shtias Yayin, the mitzvah of Shtias Yayin ala Seder, which was, as we said before, an add-on to the fundamental mitzvah of Shtias Arba Kosos. And now Rabbeinu David wants to create a parallel, a mirror image to the case of Yayin Chai, which was Rava's business, for who BMS, who are MS, for who Kamosh Amarnu Bisheson Chai, and there too, when he drank 4 cups of undiluted concentrated wine, it says Yidei Yayin Yotza, She Yotza Yidei Yayin, Velo Yotza Yidei Cherus. Right, that was the language of Rava in the case of Sheson Chai. Shepirusha, which means Sheyotza Yidei Mitzvaso B'Shtias Arba Kosos. So the word Yayin again refers to the Daled Kosos. And just like in the case of Sheson V'Vasachas, which we said Yidei Yayin Yotza means Yotza Yidei Mitzvah Shtias Yayin Shel Arba Kosos, the same identical meaning of Yedayayin Yotza applies in Rava's frame of reference in the case of Sheson Chai. So Yedayayin Yotza means mitzvahs, shtias, arba kosos. But then we go on to understand what is Sheson Bivasachas. It says Yedei arba kosos lo Yotza. We just finished saying that Yedei shtias arba kosos Yotza. So he says Haloshan Yedei dalid kosos lo Yotza, and he leaves out the word yayin. Hu al zosa kavana shamarnu sheklapei she'amru sheson chai shlo yotzi de cherus. Just like in the case where he drank unconcentrated wine, and we said Yedei cherus lo yotza. Hu lomar, what that means is shlo asa mitzvah kilchasa v'shtias kosos, that there was something missing and deficient and lacking in his kiyum of the mitzvah daled kosos. He's lacking the element of cherus when he drinks them undiluted, concentrated wine. And so too here, when he drinks them shalal seder abrachos, meaning sheson bivas achas, when it says Yidei arba kosos lo yotza, it means the arba kosos of brachos. Amru bazeh sheyotzi Yidei mitzvah kilchasa b'shtiyas hayayin shel arba kosos ela shlo yotzi Yidei aseder shesidru lem chachamim kmo she'am. To summarize Rabbeinu David, but first to emphasize what his goal is. His goal is to take pieces of the Rashbam and then drop pieces of the Rashbam in order to achieve an absolute symmetry between the cases of Sheson Chai and Sheson V'Masachas. And how does he achieve this tremendous feat? Which is going to answer all the questions that we raised yesterday on the Rashbam. What he's going to tell you is that Yidei Yayin Yotza in both cases of Chai and B'Vasachas means exactly the same thing. Yidei Yayin Yotza means he drank 4 cups of wine. What was he lacking? Where was he deficient? Why is it that he didn't fulfill his mitzvah of shtiyas daled kosos bishlemus with perfection? The answer is, here there's a difference between Chai and Vasachas, which is indicated by the language. In the case of Chai, Yidei Cherus lo yotza, that extra kiyum of Cherus he forfeits, but the basic mitzvah of daled kosos, he drank 4 kosos, albeit undiluted wine. And so too, in a kind of parallel sense, Rav is telling us in Sheson V'Vas Achas that Yidei Arba Kosos Lo Yotza means the Arba Kosos Ala Seder. And once again, missing that extra piece on top for the Shleimus HaMitzvah. So in both cases, Yidei Yayin Yotza means the mitzvah of Shtiyas Yayin Arba Kosos he fulfilled. That's the thrust and the primary takana that Chachamim instituted. And in both cases, he fulfills that. The difference being between Chai and Vasachas is which additional kiyum that was added on top did he forfeit? Where is the mitzvah that he fulfilled of Shtiyas Daled Kosos lacking? What's the deficiency? In one case, that's Chai, the incomplete nature of his kiyum is because Yidei Cheres Lo Yotza. The Rabbanu wanted to add to Shtiyas Yayin a Yayin Sheyesh B'Shtiyasa Derech Cheres, and that he forfeited. But again, as we emphasize over and over again, the basic kiyum and mitzvah of Daled Kosos, he drank Daled Kosos. In the case of Sheson Vas Achas, the extra kiyum that the Rabbanan piggybacked on top of Shtiyas Daled Kosos is to organize each one of the kosos on a bracha. And when he drank 4 kosos consecutively, he did not organize each kos on a bracha. And since he didn't recite each kos on a bracha, he forfeits the mitzvah of daled kosos. Now here it's very meduyak. Says Rabbeinu David, the Gemara in the name of Rav doesn't say Yedei Cheres Lo Yotza. After all, he drank Yayin Mazug, so there's no reason why we should rob him of his kiyum of Yedei Cheres. But on the other hand, Lo Yotza means that he's lacking in some element. But which element is he lacking in? Obviously, Rav cannot reiterate the words Yedei Cheres Lo Yotza. So instead, he says Yedei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza, meaning Daled Kosos that were organized on each one of the brachos respectively, and that is what he forfeited. Ehine Piresh Rabbeinu David is Divrei Shmuel. Shmuel was the one who made the statement, the general statement that's being interpreted by Rav and Rav about Chai and Shson Vasachas. Kipashton. I mean, if that's not an applause, I don't know what could be an applause that's better than kipashton. Kipashton meaning straightforward. So the basic mitzvah of shtiyas arba kosas shel yayin he fulfilled in both cases, whether it's chai or sheson vasachas. He did not fulfill the additional kiyum, the cherry on top that the Rabbanan added to the basic mitzvah of shtiyas daled kosos. Chai shaper kiyum daled kosos. If he drank it unconcentrated, concentrated, undiluted, I meant to say. But each kos corresponded to a bracha, so you can't tell me he didn't fulfill the mitzvah daled kosos. So Rav, or in this case, Rav actually has to come up with a different language. So that's why Rava employs the term Yedei Cheres Lo Yotza. It's not enough to drink Daled Kosos of Yayin. You need to drink Daled Kosos of Yayin Mazug that's already been diluted in order to demonstrate Cheres. Ubishason Bevas Achas, which again we're interpreting not like Rashi, that he poured all 4 cups into one large kos, but rather he did not recite the brachos and drink the kosos after the recitation of the brachos. Gam ken kiyem mitzvahs shtiyas daled kosos. He can't deny that he drank 4 kosos, and he even drank them derech cheres because it's yain mazug. Ach lo kiyem mitzvah min amuvcha. Why? Because the Rabbanan added another dimension to the mitzvah of daled kosos, and that is that each one of the kosos should be drunk after you've recited a bracha, its particular bracha. To the kiyum mitzvahs daled kosos min amuvcha tzach lishtosen al derech al seder haggadah. Uledas Rabbeinu David nicha de kol asugya mayri rak b'mitzvahs arba kosos. There's no need to introduce a foreign element that has no zecher, no mention at all in the Gemara, namely Simchas Yontif, as Rashbam had done. And again, Shmuel, who's the original formulator of this whole sugya, and we're all trying to interpret, Rava and Rav is trying to interpret Shmuel's statement. Shmuel himself, which is the original, he never mentioned anything about Simchas Yontif. Gam nicha loshen yedei yayin yotza. Why? Because Yidei Yayin Yotza means the exact same thing in both cases, namely Daled Kosos. Gam Nicha Haloshen Lo Yotza. Now we understand what it means Lo Yotza. In Shson Chai Lo Yotza, the extra kiyum of Cheres, and in Shson B'Vasachas he didn't fulfill the mitzvah muvchar of Shtiyas Daled Kosos Al Seder. So the picture looks very, very pink, very good here, until we get to the next paragraph. Here there's a little bit of a letdown. Achadayin dochuk lidas Rabbeinu David lama b'shavas achas kamer di'yedei daled kosos lo yotza. So it means that the one fault that, the one comment that you could fault Rabbeinu David is the language in Shison Chai of Rav Yidei Arba Kosos Lo Yotza. I mean, he did fulfill the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. So what do you mean Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza? Iker Chasim in a Sefer, what he should have said is Yidei Daled Kosos Al Seder Abrachos Lo Yotza. Pashtus Advar Mashvish Lo Yotzi Yidei Chovas Daled Kosos Atzmon. He adds another comment here. Lama ka'amar yidei yayin yotza, maybe yidei daled kosos yotza. Okay, we noticed that problem. The introduction of the word yayin in both cases of Shason, Chai, and Shason Vasachas is a little bit off base here. Why mention yayin here? I mean, yayin is always conjures up the image of Simchas Yontif. And that's why the Rashbam is going to introduce here the element of Simchas Yontif. According to Rabbeinu David, Simchas Yontif is out. It's not even anywhere on the overall constellation here of these halachas. So therefore, what's the emphasis here on Yayin? If you want to tell me it was Yotzei, the mitzvah of Shtiyas Daled Kosos, so tell me Shtiyas Daled Kosos. But again, I'm not sure that Rabbeinu David would be impressed by this question, because the reason why the Gemara wants to emphasize Yayin here and not Daled Kosos, as the author here says, is because in the case of Son Bevasachas, he wants to tell you that Yidei Arba Kosos Lo Yotza, meaning you have that additional element and requirement of Al Seder HaBrachos, and that he did not fulfill. So Lafuke, in order to set up a different category, he says Shtiyas Arba Kosos Shel Yayin. So I'm not sure if that's such a difficult question. The other question about why, in the case of Shason B'Masachas, he doesn't add those two words Al Seder, that is a substantial critique of Rabbeinu David, admittedly. It's a little bit Iker Chosim in a Sefer. What do you mean Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotze? You are Yotze Yidei Daled Kosos, and that's what Yayin means. Yidei Yayin Yotze means you were Yotze Daled Kosos. You drank 4 cups of wine. The only problem is that you did not fulfill the mitzvah of Al Seder, and that seems to be missing from the text of the Gemara, and it's the main point. The main point about splitting Shason Vasachas to Yotze and Lo Yotze would be whether you were Mekayim the mitzvah Daled Kosos, period, or you Mekayim mitzvah Daled Kosos Al Seder. Where do you see that in the language of the Gemara? We're only dealing with Yidei Yayin Yotza and Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza. I mean, where's the element of Al Seder? So on the one hand, Rabbeinu David gets the upper hand, and he deserves our applause because he cuts out Simchas Yontif from the picture. No mention of Simchas Yontif. But on the other polar extreme, he gets a little bit of a thumbs down here in his ratings, because where's the Al Seder, which is the main thrust of Shason Vasachas? It's lack and deficiency of Al Seder HaBrachos, and that doesn't even appear in the Sugya. So he got rid of something that doesn't appear in the Sugya, but he's missing something that doesn't appear in the Sugya. And this leads us to Rashi. Now, again, I mentioned more than once that we're not sure 100% if this is really the lashon of Rashi. The Rashbam very often quotes Rashi, and it does seem that his quote of Rashi is exactly how we have it on the top of each page in Masechet Pesachim, Marvei Pesachim, printed there. But it could be that at a later period of time, they sort of collected and they introduced into the so-called Pirush Rashi those elements that we know from the testimony of the Rashbam, that those were statements of Rashi. So if you remember, going back to the Gemara itself, we underlined a certain Rashi here. Let's take a look at it. Bivasachas, Rashi says, about 10 lines down from the top of the page, Ira arba'asan l'toch kos echad. He poured 4 cups of wine into one, presumably large kos. Now, I don't mean to prejudice you in any way, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this Rashi. I mean, on the one hand, Rashi deserves our empathy because Rashi has a problem in translating the words bivasachas. Bivasachas means in one shesiyah, without divvying it up. So Rashi has to rack his brains and figure out how do you imagine such a thing. So instead of saying that he had 4 cups and he drank them one after the other, Rashi says he poured them all into one cup. And that's called vasach. So I can empathize with Rashi on that. But my critique of Rashi is a twofold critique. One is textual. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, conceptually, can you honestly say that he drank 4 cups? And Rashi is going to say that lo yotza mitzvah shlema. He didn't fulfill the mitzvah in its shlemus, but he has the basic mitzvah. He drank 1 kos. Now, I could critique Rashi on the other end of the spectrum if I take a totally different perspective, and I would say, you know what difference does it make whether he had it in 1 kos or 4 kosos? Why would the Rabbanu make a big deal about that? He drank the revius or rov revius, whatever he needs, 4 times over because he had poured 4 cups of revius yayin from each kos into 1 large kos. And when he got to the bracha that was corresponding to that particular shtia, he drank whatever amount of wine he had to drink. He had the volume that he needs. And again, according to everybody, no Rishon would question this. He's using yayin mazug in the case of Shesov Vasachas. So that's not a problem. And now Rashi is saying, well, he may have drunk it on each one of those revios or rov revios. I'll say there habrachos. Okay. He's got everything he needs. So again, I'm just sharing my emotional response to Rashi. Part of me says, what are you talking about? He drank 1 kos. What do you mean he fulfilled the basic mitzvah by drinking 1 kos? And the other side of me says, Adarabah. Was felt. What's missing here? Well, what's lacking here? He had 4 cups. He poured them in, and he drank them. Each amount of required wine at different occasions, based on the different brachas. So, what do we want from his life over here? That's on a conceptual level. So again, I can come from 2 different ends of the spectrum and perhaps feel uncomfortable about Rashi on a conceptual level. But perhaps more fundamentally, in a sense, the language of the Gemara makes hardly any sense according to Rashi. It says here, according to Rav, Yedei yayin yotzi, Yedei arba kosas lo yotza. So wait a minute. If you're telling me Yedei arba kosas lo yotza because he only drank 1 kos, which again, we had a certain empathy towards that approach. He drank only 1 kos. Where are the 4 kosos? And therefore, Yedei arba kosas lo yotza, says Rav. So what does it mean, Yedei yayin yotza? Are we once again going to introduce maybe Simchas Yontif and say, well, what difference does it make if he drank from 4 different cups or he drank the same exact amount of wine from one large kos, one large glass? In both cases, he's going to reach the same high, the same level of simcha, and therefore Yidei Yayin Yotza. But now we associate with the word Yayin Simchas Yontif, as we saw in the Rashbam. Does Rashi mention a word about Simchas Yontif? I don't see it. Can you check me out on that? Double check me. Don't rely on me. I didn't see that Rashi introduced Simchas Yontif here. You could argue that Rashi is not interested in Simchas Yontif as much as he's interested in Derech Cherus, because we've already established in the case of Shasan Chai that he forfeits the mitzvah of Cherus. And now the question is, when he pours all 4 cups into one large cup, is that a fulfillment of Cherus? What I mean to say is that, from one perspective, in terms of the volume of wine that he drank, he is really demonstrating Cherus. But from another perspective, we want to demonstrate Cherus in a way that's recognizable, not just because he drank, a revius times 4 in terms of the volume of wine that he drank, but that over and over again with one shti after the other, or you know what, maybe I don't even have to say it that way. Let's take the number 4 as a magic number. It's the Arba Lashonos of Geula, is the Arba Kosa Shel Paradios Yehishka Es Paro, and so forth. Whatever the number 4 means, it's got significance. And that's called Derech Cherus. The Cherus element has to express itself in 4 different kosos. That's the way the Rabbanan established the mitzvah of Daled kosos. He's not drinking 4 different kosos. So maybe the distinction between Yidei Yayin Yotza and Yidei Arba Kosos Lo Yotza, in Rav's language here, in the case of Shason V'Vasachas, indicates 2 sides of a coin. And both address the issue of Derech Cherus. On the one hand, Yidei Yayin Yotza. Yayin meaning the volume of wine that he was meant to drink. And to demonstrate this a little bit further, maybe, to dramatize it, he had originally 4 cups. He started with 4 cups. Okay, he poured them into 1 cup. But if you ask me, how much wine did he actually consume? He consumed the identical volume of wine, whether he drank it from 4 different kosos or from 1 large kos. So in effect, if the mitzvah of Derech Cherus in Daled Kosos is shti of Daled Kosos, meaning Daled Revios of Yayin, then that's exactly what he did. He started with Daled Kosos. Now, in terms of how to implement the shti of those Daled Kosos, what difference it make? That's only a technicality. So the main point here, in terms of Yidei Yayin Yotza, with vis-a-vis Derech Cherus, is how much wine did he drink? But then we get to another issue. The Rabbanan established that the Derech Cherus should be demonstrated by 4 different kosos. And the number 4 is symbolic and meaningful unto itself. Each kos is counted as part of the Daled Kosos. And here, Lamaisa, I don't care about history. Yesterday he poured Daled Kosos, but today he's drinking from one kos. So where's the key of Daled Kosos? So in that sense, maybe what Rav is saying, according to Rashi, is that Sheson B'vas Achas, on the one hand, he achieved the drinking of Derech Cheres in terms of kamus, in terms of the volume of wine that he was required to drink. But the flip side, namely, that there's a significance inherently to the number 4, that he didn't achieve because he drank from one kos. So now we're going to turn to page Yudalit, which I believe you have. And if I understood correctly, the last page you have is Tesvav, so we'll have to somehow solve that problem. Maybe, John, you could help me with that. I don't know. In any event, Hine Pirish Rashi Devas Achas Ein Pirish Pirish Rashbam V'Tos Rabbeinu Peres Rabbeinu David Shakavana Shalosh Sheson Al Seder Haggadah. Oh, look at that. She'ein Ze Pshat Hadvarim. Rashi is very committed to the words of the Gemara and the literal translation. Where does it say Shalal Seder Haggadah? It says Sheson Vasachas. So Rashi refused to accept the classic understanding of this Sheson Vasachas scenario and rejected it because that's not called Sheson Vasachas. So Rashi wants to know, what does the Gemara mean that he drank 4 cups simultaneously? The other Rishonim is saying, well, you know why it's simultaneous? Even though really he didn't drink all 4 cups simultaneous. He finished one and then he drank another and then a third and then a fourth. But vis-a-vis the Seder Haggadah, it's called simultaneous. But again, you're adding a whole new element. Rashi wants to really, really be dedicated to understand, what does it mean he drank 4 cups simultaneously? Well, what does that mean? Rashi says, could you imagine, the following vision, the following picture? The man has his mouth open, he tilts his head back, and he takes 1 cup after the other and pours it down his throat. Is that Vasachas? Imagine the juggling act over here, He moves his head back. He's got his right hand, picks up a cup. Immediately takes his left hand, gobbles down another cup. Third, fourth, that's what Vasachas means. So Rashi has a simple, straightforward understanding of what Vasachas is. He poured the Daled Kosos into 1 kos. Again, you might immediately wonder, why this whole exercise according to Rashi? Why do you start with Daled Kosos? It's almost as if Rashi is imagining that the mitzvah of Daled Kosos begins when you take from a large container of yayin, a large bottle of wine, and you start pouring. So you poured it into 4 kosos. You already scored something. You're already you're on the radar screen. I'm wondering, according to Rashi, what would be if he never had the 4 kosos? He had his barrel of wine and immediately poured the volume of 4 kosos into 1 kos, but he never had square one where he had 4 kosos. And again, I don't understand the logic of it, but it could be that according to Rashi, in such a case, he ends up with 0. He has not fulfilled the mitzvah at all. In other words, I'm not calculating how much intoxication he has. His level, they, chas v'shalom, a person is in a car accident, the first thing they do is they test his, what's it called? The level of intoxication, how much did he drink before he got into this accident, right? The police report. Rashi's saying that's not Dalit Kosos. Like each kos is, let's say, 15% alcohol. So 15% alcohol times 4, and that's what he drank. No. There's got to be Dalit Kosos. Im ein Dalit Kosos hasipur lo matchil b'chlal. You want to start the story, you have to have at some point Dalit Kosos. Again, it's a little bit odd that the fact that at one time he had Dalit Kosos. I don't know when he poured the Dalit Kosos. Did he do it a week before Pesach? I don't know when he did it. But Lama Zogin, again, this is a push in Rashi, that on the night of the Seder, he poured wine into 4 different Kosos. And then, he has, somebody brought him a gift for Pesach, and it's a very large kos. I always imagine, if you've seen like in Britain or anywhere, even in Israel, you'll see that the beer drinkers, they come up with this kos that's like, 10 feet tall. So he wanted to be Machabi, the guy who brought him a gift. So he poured all 4 cups into one large cup. I don't know. But is there halachic significance in the fact that he started with Dalit Kosos? That's something that we want to focus our attention on, according to Rashi. But once again, Rashi is talking about Vavasachas, and Rashi says that the real Vavasachas means that he's got all 4 cups in one cup. But now the question is, when did he drink the 4 kosos? So it could be that Rashi has already scored, he's already achieved the Shason Vavasachas by having them all in one kos. So the Vasachas means that all 4 cups are in one kos. That's also a weak point here in Rashi. Because the emphasis here is not on the kos, but on just shtia. It says shesan b'vasachas. According to Rashi, I don't know. I'm not sure that Rashi is saying that he drank all 4 kosos simultaneously. Then he says, "Udasa rishonu lo yotzi yedei chovaso v'havi bichlal b'vasachas." So Rashi is saying that according to all the Rishon, this is the way he's interpreting Rashi's objection, that according to all the Rishonim, unanimously, the understanding, the Pirush of the Gemara is that he drank one kos after the other, with 4 kosos there, and lo yotzi yedei chovasa, he did not fulfill his mitzvah. But why? Why is that called vasachas? Just because he separated the shtios and he drank them one after the other. Again, that could be, Yidei Seder Abrachas lo yotza, but that doesn't appear in the Gemara. Ein ze pshat al-lashon. This is a real strong argument against the Rishonim, as we've seen in the past. In the case of Shasam Vasachas, it says Yidei Arba Kosos lo yotza. If he drank 4 different kosos, why should it be that Lidei? Again, and that was our objection, even according to Rabbeinu David. The Gemara left out the key words here, Shalo ala say there. Valkain, based on these problems that Rashi was addressing here in the Gemara, based on the Rishonim, Piresh Rashi Vasach Sakona She'ira Dal Kos Tok Kos Achas. Umade Hikshu Rashbam V'Tosus Tienza Ela Kos Echad. So again, we had 2 polar opposite approaches as to why we'd object to Rashi, and one approach was he drank only 1 kos. How can you tell me that he was yotzi the mitzvah Dalit kosos in any shape or form if he only drank 1 kos? So here's where the Mechaber is coming to try to defend Rashi against the attack of all the other Rishonim. He drank 1 kos and he's yotze? How could that be? Nira fire. So again, I'm hoping that at some point or other, I'm hoping he'll point out that there were 4 kosos at square one. Levar b'shitas Rashi, the yisod din daled kosos hu takona shel shtias ribu yain. Oh, he's touching on that element that we mentioned before about the kamus, the volume of wine that he drank. On this night, we want to demonstrate that we drink more wine than we would on any other night. Like my mother-in-law says about France, she was 5 years in France after the war as a teenager. And she said that the French will drink wine at every meal. So if you're going to drink wine on the Leil HaSeder in France, then what's the big deal? So you have to add ribu yain. In other words, let's say, Rashi was in France and he was in the wine industry. So let's say Rashi is bothered by the fact that, okay, you know what? This is wonderful. You're drinking wine at the Seder table. But so what? You drink wine here in France like it's going out of style. My mother-in-law is always quick to point out nobody got drunk because it was so much part of the meal. It was like a beverage. And now the Chachamim want to make a separate mitzvah of Daled Kosos. They have to introduce Ribu Yayin. Go beyond your hergel, what you would normally drink. For Ribu Yayin Nibdad, the Ribu Kosos shel Daled Kosos. Oh, now he's throwing a curveball here. I think we're moving backwards instead of forwards. He's telling me that Ribu Yayin is not, something that you measure in the laboratory, in an experiment, and you see how much wine did you drink. No. It's got to be Daled Kosos. Do you follow what's going on here? He's now creating a shatnez of sorts. He's introducing 2 different elements and integrating them. And he's saying that it's Ribu Yain on the one end, but it's got to be Daled Kosos. I mean, there's a jump here, a leap of faith. I understand that you want Ribu Yain, but who says Ribu Yain needs Daled Kosos? The Loba Kamus Yain Greda. It's not enough that you have Kamus Yain. Here's a big vat of wine. It's got many revius in it. And you drink it, that's not Ribu Yain. It is Ribu Yain, but it's not the Ribu Yain that the Rabbanan established for the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. And again, he's not introducing the brachos, because my guess is that it's at least plausible that according to Rashi, when he drank this, 4 reveals from this large kos, it could be he drank it al Seder HaBrachos. When we came in Shekain, Sfir Leil Rashi, the Mosai Daled Kosos lekos achas. Oh, you hear the language here. He started with Daled Kosos, and then he poured them into 1 kos. Shapim mikri sheshosa ribu yayin shel Daled Kosos. Aha. I think he's saying that once you had the Daled Kosos from the get-go, that could help a lot if we need the Ribu Yayin of Daled Kosos, because you really have the Ribu Yayin of Daled Kosos. Oh, now he says it explicitly. Achim Mozag Minachovis Shir Daled Kosos Lekos Achas. You hear this, Rabbosai? He's asking what happens if he skipped a step, right? Instead of pouring 4 kosos, he went to the chavis, to the barrel. Rashi doesn't mention any of this. This is very creative on his part. And he took out, or let's say he poured out from the chavis into 1 gigantic kos, the ribu yayin, the volume of wine that he needs. So again, if we read the Rashi carefully, Ira Arbasan, he poured the 4 cups, litol kosecha. He didn't pour it from a chavis, a gigantic vat of wine. Had he done so, and he took all the wine into one large kos from the chavis, directly from the chavis, lo yatsi dechol vasa. Even Rashi would agree that that's not a havamina, that he could be owed say anything. Zero. He gets zero credit for this, no points whatsoever. He's not drinking. Again, you might argue, but he's got the ribu yayin. But no, you need ribu yayin of dalid kosas. The takonis ribu yayin hoisa shiyu dalid kosas. Chemozga and me'achavis. If he pours them out of the chavis, leka dalid kosas. So now he has a long footnote. So, let's fast forward for a moment. Maybe we'll come back to the footnote, and we're up to Yud Beis on the left column. V'nira de lefizeh, Pirish Rashi is kol asugya. Let's set the table. Let's present the sugya according to Rashi. Svirle l'Rashi. Sod chiyuv b'dal kosos hu takonis chachamim lishtos ribu yayin v'leil seder. V'shiur haribu yidalid kosos. So if you want to measure out what constitutes ribui, it's whatever dalid kosos would contain. The volume of yayin contained in 4 cups, that's ribui yayin. So the shear of ribui is dalid kosos. Achle mitzvah min muvchar tiknu od sheyishte kol achas midalid kosos bekos b'fnei atzma. So in addition to ribu yayin, we have another takana that the amount of wine that each kos contains should be drunk separately in 4 different kossos. Because kol achas mi arba kossos bekos b'fnei atzma. V'lo es kula mikos achas. By the way, I don't think it means physically he has 4 kosos. It could all be 1 kos, but just he drinks from that kos and then washes it out. And, you know what I'm saying? Well, I have in mind a poor person. Let's say all he has is 1 kos. Last night I passed this store that was selling kosos. These nice kosos. They were charging 75 shekel for a kos. A poor person can't afford more than 1 kos. But that's still 4 kosos. V'chein sheyishtes hayayin kshu mozug, u'shnei advarim elu biyachad havi kiyum nosaf d'lechatchila b'mitzvos dalid kosos. All right, at this point, I don't think it's 100% clear what he's saying. Again, he has mozug. That's the case of Shom Vasachas. No problem, mozug. And he's supposed to be drinking from 4 cups, not from 1 cup. But that's only mitzvah min muvchar. He already has the shear of ribu dalid kosos because he had the yayin in 4 different kosos. But the shtia, that requires a shtia of kol achas midalid kosos b'fnei atzma, because b'fnei atzma. B'yachad have a kiyum din nosaf del chatchila b'mitzvos dalid kosos. I think he's saying the following, that the basic demonstration, so to speak, of cherus is to drink the volume of dalid kosos, which he did. He had yayin and dalid kosos, poured them into 1 kos. He definitely fulfilled ribu yayin, and that's the basic kiyum of dalid kosos derech cherus. Now the Rabbanan added another element, and that's the number 4. but the number 4 is not 4 shtios, but rather 4 kosos. And when he pours all 4 into one kos and he drinks them all from one kos, he forfeits that extra kiyum of drinking from 4 different kosos. I appreciate what he's saying over here, because Rashi wants to say the yayin yotza and shesam vasachas means the basic kiyum he has, but he didn't drink it from daled kosos. You see, that's very nice now, because look at Rav's language. Rav says yidei arba kosos lo yotza because he only drank from one kos. But yidei yayin yotza, in terms of ribu yayin, that he fulfilled. He drank all the volume of all 4 kosos, albeit from one kos. See, the yayin yotza, meaning ribu yayin. See, the gadlus of this essay that we're reading here, this presentation, the Amudi Hod, is that he adds that phrase. Terminology is very important. I don't have to tell you that. When you're learning, Torah ba'amkus, in Lumdus, you need the terminology. He's creating a breakthrough terminology, which doesn't say in Rashi, and that's ribui yayin. So the ikar kiyum of daled kosos is the ribu yayin. The shear of ribu yayin is daled kosos. So that he has already. He poured from 4 cups into one large kos. He's got the shear of ribu yayin of daled kosos. Now the Rabbanan added another element, demonstrate the number 4, let's say 4 lashonos of geula, but do it with 4 different kosos. And when he drinks from the same kos over and over and over again, he's lacking that extra glamour, that extra element of lashonos shel geula, 4 lashonos shel geula. So in other words, Rashi holds it's not enough to have 4 shtios. You have to have 4 shtios from 4 kosos. But that again is an add-on and a mitzvah min hamuvcha. Now, let's see what he says here in the in the brackets on the bottom of the right column that we skipped, Yudalid. I'm sorry, page Yudalid on the right. Yesh la'ayin lepirush Rashi im yimzog dalid kosos lekos achas umin hakos hazu yimzog lekos shnia im yotzi dei chovas dalid kosos. Whoa, I wouldn't say that's a suffix at all. You hear what he did? He started with 1 kos, and then from the 1 kos, he divided it up into 4 kosos. And what's the problem with that? Sof yayin shosim hugu dalid kos. Yayin ze mikri yayin dalid kos. Yishlomar tol mikri yayin dalid kos. Kos shemimena shosa. Sofa yimzugu dalid kosos. To be in l'chol pachos. Shebekos shemimena shosa l'tocha yimzugu dalid kosos nifradim. So I guess since the Mesiga of 4 kosos was from 1 kos, therefore you're missing that shear of ribu yayin that comes from dalid kosos, because the shear actually comes from 1 kos. So you have 1 great gigantic kos with 4 revios, let's say, and then he poured it into 4 cups. I don't hear it, honestly. I don't think it should be an issue. Okay, Rabbosai, so let's make a note of where we got up to here. We're really up to the bottom of page Yudalid, but really on top of page Tesvav. Now, in terms of the schedule,